Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, 12 soft skills every seller doer must have. And of course, Scott Butcher is your presenter today. So before I hand it over to him, I'm going to do a few housekeeping items. Per usual, you can customize your screen by going to the GoToWebinar screen viewer, maximize the webcam, feel like you're in the room with Scott, or the presentation, whichever you prefer. We do have two different audio options this afternoon, the computer audio and the dial-in option. We do see that the dial-in option is a little bit more reliable as it is not streamed over internet. So if you're having any trouble, toggle between the two of those. And if not, just ping us and we will try to resolve that for you. We do have the handout available for download in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. So go ahead and download that. It's the handout that Scott will be walking through today during the presentation. You'll also receive a copy of that in the email that it's sent to you after the presentation concludes. Any questions you have, drop them into the questions panel, as we do not typically monitor the chat box throughout the presentation. We will have 3 polls as we are offering CPE, so make sure you're answering all 3 of those in order to be eligible for that CPE credit. Speaking of that credit, we do send our CPE certificates through a third party called Simple Cert. So if you're not seeing that drop into your inbox within a few business days after the presentation concludes, check your junk and your spam folders. If it's not in there, reach out to us and we will resolve that as quickly as possible. And last but not least, our survey. Let us know how we did. List any questions that are in that we're able to get answered throughout the presentation today. And that is where you will select if you will need that CPE credit or not. So Scott, you take them away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kaylee. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of our webinar today. We just had so much interest in our program. So exciting to see all of you here. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. It's kind of funny, when we have webinars centered around seller doers, we always get a lot of really good attendance. So thank you for being part of this. And let's start our journey here. So Kelly mentioned, I am Scott Butcher. Many of you have been on prior webinars. There's a lot of new names and faces, even though I can't see you right now, that might be new to this seller doer series that we've been doing. I've been in the industry for more than 30 years within the built environment, spent most of my career with a group of interrelated companies. We had an architectural, structural, civil engineering practice, we had an MEP engineering firm, and we had a design build entity. And I kind of worked as a chief marketing officer across all 3 and an owner of all 3. And then I went out on my own, and I've been with Stanball Nest for several years now. So excited to be part of your day. And again, appreciate the interest. Here's what we're going to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about this concept of the seller-doer trifecta, the 3 components that really build a well-rounded seller-doer. We're going to talk about how these soft skills are actually the power skills today. The skills that you came here for, these 12 critical skills, and then an overarching skill that really permeates all the other 12 skills. And then leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. But again, if you have questions along the way, drop them into the chat here. And with that, let's talk a little bit about this trifecta, this trio of what makes a well-rounded seller doer. Chose this graphic by choice because it does mean round, and these are equal components. And the first one I like to say is the aptitude. Now, a lot of times when we talk about seller doers, you've probably said this or heard this, you know, Scott just doesn't have the aptitude to do business development. Well, what you're saying is Scott might not have the aptitude to cold call. And because a lot of people think seller doer means cold call. And the reality is that in today's environment, there are so many ways we can succeed in business development. It's rarely about placing the cold call at all, almost never. Aptitude by definition is natural strengths. And if you've followed any Stanball Nest programs before, if you've ever received an email directly from a Stanball Nest employee, you know we love the Gallup strengths or the Clifton strengths. In our email signatures, you see our top 5 strengths. These are our natural aptitudes. And to succeed as a seller doer, you have to make sure you are leveraging those strengths. When we do seller doer training, that's really important part of the training, is understanding and leveraging your strengths. And we do that because we use a toolbox. There are more than 15 different, what I'll call, tools that a seller doer can utilize to generate new opportunities for their company. And so it's really important that we make sure we're matching the tools with the aptitudes. So take these tools, take the natural strengths, and that gets you 2/3 of where you need to be to succeed as a seller doer. Yet there's a component that's missing to that. And what's missing is the skill set. So the skill set is a little different than the aptitude. An aptitude is a natural strength. Skills can be taught. And really where our focus today is talking about these soft skills, which are increasingly becoming important to succeed as a seller doer. Oh, what is a seller doer? Should I define that? Well, by definition, a seller doer is somebody that is balancing billable work to clients with some element of business development, bringing the work in. The reality, most seller doers spend most of their time doing and a smaller percentage of their time selling. We call it a seller doer because the Society for Marketing Professional Services calls them seller doers. It's the most common term. Everybody hates it. But the reality is that we must sell the work before we can do the work. You might call them doer sellers at your firm. You might call them closer doers or some other terms. We're all talking about the same things. People have to balance doing the work with bringing the work in. So this soft skill set, why is it so important? Well, you've heard a lot the past few weeks, past 2 months about ChatGPT. This study came out just a couple weeks ago from Goldman Sachs, and they were looking at industries and professions that were going to be the most and least disrupted by artificial intelligence. And this is not all the industries that they analyzed, but the top 5 are the top 5. Look there, architecture and engineering is projected to be the 3rd most disruptive industry. And what we're looking at here is the percent of employment that could be displaced or is at risk of being displaced by artificial intelligence. That's more than 1/3 of the architectural engineering workforce that could be replaced in the coming years by artificial intelligence. Drop to the bottom of the list, though, you can see at 6% is construction, at 1% is buildings and grounds. So we still need people out there that are actually building. Yes, there's robotic tools, there's automation that's being used on the construction site, but really shorter term, it's the artificial intelligence that's going to disrupt a lot of the design that we're doing. Generative design has been a part of Revit since 2020. It's been around longer than that. For somebody like me that does a lot of work with strategy and marketing, ChatGPT, I'm already using it as a tool. It's not a be-all, end-all. It can be very simplistic. Sometimes it can plagiarize or be downright inaccurate, but it's already a tool that I'm able to look at as a time-saving tool. So we need to pay attention to this, and we need to understand that what are the components of our job that are going to be disrupted by artificial intelligence. It's the more basic stuff. It's the stuff we typically don't want to do day in and day out. So let's embrace this. We already have a workforce shortage across architecture, engineering, and big time in construction as well. If we can fill gaps with artificial intelligence, there's great opportunity there for us to focus on higher value work. But in order to do that, we really need to round out our soft skills. So we often talk about hard skills versus soft skills. So let's define them. A hard skill is that job-related knowledge that you need to be successful. So we need hard skills to do what we're hired to do. A civil engineer has a set of hard skills to do civil engineering. It's basically what people know. Notice rocks, hard edges in our visual here. Conversely, a soft skill is really a quality or a character trait that helps people interact effectively with others. It's about interpersonal skills. It's about communication skills. It's about emotional intelligence, and it's about who people are. So you can have great hard skills, what you know, and still be an asshole, meaning you have very poor soft skills. So soft skills today are increasingly viewed as power skills, right? That cotton visual, it's easy to push around and change the shape and its edges aren't there. That's soft skills. The terminology implies weak or secondary or inferior. Power skills really tells the story, because to succeed with hard skills, we need robust soft skills, which is why we utilize the term power skills. So Kaylee promised 3 polling questions. Here's your first one, Kaylee. We're going to launch into this, and we just want to know about how you would rate, on average, your group of current seller doers when it comes to their soft skills. So take it away.
All right, so the poll is launched, and I will leave it open until about 85% of our crowd has participated, or if a minute elapses, whichever comes first. And it looks like about half the crowd has voted, so just need a few more people to participate, and then we can turn it back to Scott. Looks like more than half the crowd is saying they're about average. We don't have any in the poor category, so that's good news.
Excellent.
All right, we are at 85%, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll
Perfect.
and share the results with everybody. So like I said, 61% is about average, 26% say they're above average, and then 12% fall on that below average. But no one in poor and no one in exceptional, so
Interesting.
we're in a good place here.
We have that U-shaped curve, don't we? Or the inverse U-shaped curve. And I obviously, when you have an option of average and we're telling you to average everybody in your organization, average is what was anticipated. But it brings up the point, you probably within your organization have some people that have exceptional soft skills and some people that are very poor with their soft skills. And you rely on those with the better soft skills, maybe to coach or mentor those with less than. What we see in our practice area, so my role at Stanbone S is the Strategic Growth Advisory. I'm director there. And we work with companies on strategic planning, business development and marketing planning, and we do a lot of training of seller-doers, communication skills, soft skills, interpersonal skills, that sort of thing. We are increasingly seeing requests from clients to help with the interpersonal and communication skills, the power skills. And some of it is generational related, but also it's as people move into different categories in the company, they need to change their skill set. So very common request, even when we do dedicated seller-doer training, typically about half of the training we do actually ends up being more on the soft skills side. So let's talk about these skills, these power skills. What do our seller-doers need to know, and why do they need to know it? It should be no surprise to anyone that we have active listening and verbal communication here. It is an essential skill for the workplace. It is an essential skill for a project manager, for a firm executive, and absolutely for a seller-doer. It is also an incredibly difficult skill. And the reason is, you've probably heard this, the human attention span is now below that of a goldfish. Have you heard this one? So this is tracked yearly. Don't ask me how they track it, but in 2000, our collective attention span was 12 seconds, and today it's just a wisp over 8 seconds. This means that as I'm talking, since I've had this slide up about the goldfish, you're thinking about, I wonder if that's true. What am I having for dinner tonight? I know what I need to pick up from the store on the way home. Our mind goes every different direction, and suddenly we lose focus. It's human nature. So active listening is listening with the intent to understand. We constantly lose focus, and we constantly have to intentionally bring us back. What we often do when we are having a conversation with someone, that verbal communication, is we're listening with the intent to respond. We are thinking of what we are going to say next. And when we do that, we are not listening with the intent to understand, and we are missing important information. Active listening is about observing. So it's the words coming out. You've probably heard the statistic that only 7% of verbal communication is the words themselves. It's a somewhat suspect study, but it does reinforce the importance of not just what is said, the way it's said, the tone of our voice, the speed, the intonation, and the body language that goes along with it. You ask me how I'm doing, and I say, fine. That's real positive, right? My voice went up, I smiled, I'm doing fine. Or I could say, fine. Same word, vastly different meaning. So we have to observe this to be a good active listener and verbal communicator. We have to ask meaningful questions. And one of the things that you're going to see throughout the context of our program today is the importance of asking questions to gain a deeper understanding. A good active listener embraces this as a skill. We have to provide feedback to demonstrate that we're listening. Sometimes it's a nonverbal, like a head shake. Sometimes it's non-words like, Hmm. Hmm. Or really, tell me more. These are all elements of feedback that lets the other person know that we are paying attention and that we want to go deeper. We want more information. We have to demonstrate that we are paying attention. We do that by eye contact. We do that by our body language. Have you ever been out at, say, a networking event, a conference, a trade show, and you're talking to somebody in a room full of people and they're really looking around to see who else is there? Do you feel like they are paying attention to you? Of course you don't. That is a nonverbal negative sign that shows they're not paying attention. And finally, we need to avoid interrupting. When we listen with the intent to respond, we're more apt to interrupt. An interruption puts up a verbal wall and negatively impacts the communications that we're having. We also need to understand the context of verbal communication. And there are 5 primary types, and the first type is intrapersonal, which is that voice in the head. So your voice in your head is talking to you right now. Mine is talking to me. Mine's saying, are we on time or are we falling behind a little bit, Scott? Right? It's always in our head talking to us. Then we have interpersonal communication, which is often just the one-on-one conversations that we have over a Teams call, a phone call, in person across the desk, whatever the case may be. The small group is very, very common if you're a seller-doer, if you're a project manager or a project team member. We have a meeting with a group of clients, a group of coworkers, could be 3, could be 8, could be 12 project team members, for instance. Then there is public communication. We call this public speaking, and I'm going to talk a little more about that shortly. And then mass communication. If we're on a podcast or we're like right now delivering a webinar, this is mass communication, or even getting quoted in the newspaper, being interviewed. And so we need to understand there are these different types of communication and act and behave appropriately and really tailor our verbal communication depending upon the scenario that we are engaged in. Right? If we have a small group, we can't dominate the conversation. When we're doing interpersonal communication one-on-one, theoretically, we could be speaking about half the time, but a great reference is the human body. 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you talk. That'll help you to be a better active listener. Storytelling. If we were doing this program a decade ago, and I'm talking soft skills, I probably wouldn't have talked about storytelling. Yet it has become so essential a skill set, not just for seller doers, but for business people in general. And the reason is that, lovely picture here, right? You are 20 times more likely to remember a story with statistics than the statistic alone. So if I just showed you a slide that said 22x on it, that's a statistic. Difficult for your brain to grab the context. But look at the visual. It's a storybook castle at sunrise or sunset, take your pick, and could be Disney. That could be the castle that inspired Walt Disney, who knows? But I'm telling a story and saying, you know what, if I tell you a statistic in a storybook scenario, you're going to remember that you are far more likely to remember a story with statistics than the statistic alone. And that's why we need to be good storytellers. And there are so many different ways that we tell stories as seller doers. The company story. This is the company pitch, the elevator speech, whatever you want to call it. This is the why about the company. But then we have the project stories. What were the project challenges? Was it successful? What issues were encountered and what were the solutions? Client story. So a project exists to satisfy a client need. The client has a business case. So let's think about a college that's looking for new student housing that's going to help them recruit students and drive enrollment. So using that scenario, we could talk all about the new student housing facility and how awesome it was, but there's a business case above that. If the goal was to improve enrollment figures, did they improve enrollment figures by 10%? If they did, boy, what a great story to tell, because you're really reinforcing the business context that drove the construction project. How about a trend story? A lot of my existence, if you follow me or we're connected on LinkedIn, I tell trend stories all the time. It's sort of on brand for me. I look at what's happening in the industry. I tell trend stories. I get to go to conferences, even give keynotes about industry trends. I'm always telling trend stories. An analogy is simply a comparison of 2 things. It's a type of story comparing A with B. As a seller doer, you should have that skill set because you're going to need to do that a lot. How about personal anecdotes? As a seller doer, particularly at the whether I'm delivering training or I'm at the early stages of getting to know one another, generating awareness, creating demand, I often tell personal anecdotes just from my life, my experience, and I guarantee you through the course of our session together today, you'll hear a couple personal anecdotes. Lessons learned, always love lessons learned, the good, the bad, the ugly, the crazy ugly, because we learn. And when we learn, we can share this knowledge with others. And when we share a lesson learned of something that went off the rails, it shows some humility on our part that, hey, we don't know everything. Sometimes we haven't had success, but we've learned from it. And then a contextual story. This is where we're just trying to provide a background or context for the conversation that we're having with a client or with a prospect. Our third soft skill or power skill is really about value messaging. And I think this is absolutely underrated. You might hear, oh, what's our value message? What's our elevator pitch? That's a type of story. But a seller doer understands that through the course of days, weeks, months, years, they will need to come up with hundreds of different value messages. We could have a 1-hour conversation together. I'm there as a seller doer. You're there as my potential client. I might listen to what you're saying because I'm listening actively, and I'm thinking of a value message to respond to what we're saying. And there are different formulas out there. A value message at its core is a story. So this is a story formula. What's the challenge that the client is facing? What is the potential solution that Stand-on-S could be offering? What is the advantage of that solution? Why would you use us for that as opposed to somebody else? And how do we know it works, right? What is the verification or the proof? We live in a world of social proof. Before you buy a product, you research it online, you read the customer reviews. That's the proof or the verification. That's part of building a value message. And we do that in so many contexts. This needs to become an unconscious skill. It just happens. It's absolutely critical for a seller doer because we might have to tell a company specific value message about us, or service specific about the way we approach civil engineering or construction management, how our approach is different, how that's going to benefit the client, and proof or verification of how it helped other clients. Or project specific, like you're pursuing a bridge project or a new mixed use development. Stories related specifically to that kind of project. Or maybe we need to build a value message around the market. So, you think of the story of the student housing I just referenced. So there's a whole big world outside of that. So understanding that higher education is facing a cliff in enrollment right now, that they're going to fall off in a couple years. Up to 100 smaller liberal arts colleges are at risk of closing over the next decade. Schools are struggling with enrollment right now. So when we understand what's happening with higher education, we can understand what's perhaps happening with student housing in higher education and how that's trying to impact enrollment figures, and we can develop value messages around that. Perhaps it's very specific to a type of client or a specific client. For instance, you've done 17 projects with the Department of Transportation. You know other project managers, you know the processes, you know the state laws impacting it, you know the new laws that are going into effect. You can build value messages around that very specific, sometimes unique knowledge that maybe the competition doesn't have. And then finally, the geography specific. With geography specific, here we are talking about your knowledge of a region, of the codes in a municipality, of the weather conditions in a certain geographic region, whatever the case may be. These are all potential places that we may pull from to create value messages. Value messages belong in emails, they belong in proposals, they belong in cover letters, they belong in executive summaries, they belong in project interviews. And guess what? They belong in those very early conversations that you're having with potential clients out there. Very, very important skill for a seller doer. I mentioned earlier public speaking as a type of verbal communication. This is a skill that can be taught. Guess what? 3 out of 4 of us are afraid of public speaking. Maybe our fear or phobia is just that we get nervous. We do it. We just get nervous before we do it. For other people, it might be a crippling fear. So understand there is a general resistance to public speaking. Yeah, you've heard those bogus studies. Americans fear public speaking more than they fear death. Yeah, guess what? Not true. We fear a lot of things more than public speaking, but yes, we do collectively fear public speaking more than snakes and spiders. So we need to enhance our skill set as seller doers. And there are 5 primary types of public speaking that we may be called upon to give. The first one is ceremonial speaking. Ceremonial speaking, let's say you're involved in a client organization as a seller doer. Maybe it's the International Facilities Management Association, the Society of American Military Engineers, the Construction Owners Association of America, the American Society of Healthcare Engineering, whatever that client organization is, and you are chairing the program committee. Great approach for a seller doer to get to know clients in sort of a neutral forum. And then you have to get up and you introduce the speaker. Maybe you're not the speaker, but you introduce the speaker. That's an example of ceremonial speaking. Persuasive speaking, guess what? If you're a doer, you have to be persuasive. We need to use persuasion all the time, and I'm going to talk about that shortly. Informative speaking is basically when you're sharing information to an audience and the audience decides what they want to do with it. This right now, me to you, is informative speaking. I'm giving you information. Maybe you love it, maybe you hate it, maybe you do something with it, maybe you don't. I'm just trying to provide information. Entertaining speaking, this is less common for a seller doer. I don't know a lot of seller doers that are comedians and get up and tell jokes at events. I've known a few that are just very funny and they just own the room, whatever they're doing, but less common for seller doers. And then the 5th type of public speaking is demonstrative speaking. And this is actually where you are teaching someone a specific tool or skill to help them do something. So by way of example here, this webinar is informative speaking. I'm providing a lot of information to you about the topic of seller doer skills. I might go in with a client tomorrow, which I actually am doing tomorrow, and be very specific with the skill set. So tomorrow with a client, we are talking about emotional intelligence and the importance of emotional intelligence in becoming a better communicator. So with that very small audience, with that one company, very focused on demonstrative speaking to teach a skill to that group of people. Time management is the number 5 soft skill we want to talk about. And if there's one area where the seller doer model continually falls down, it's I'm so busy doing, I don't have time to go sell, right? You've heard this, you might have lived this. Guess what? All of us waste about half of our workday on low value or no value tasks. And this is where I think automation and artificial intelligence will give us a great assist, trying to help us do that lower value stuff so we can focus on the higher value stuff. But when we think time management and when we go in with our clients and we teach time management, we talk about how to be better organized, because when you're disorganized, you waste a lot of time. You can't find the file that you're looking for. Prioritization is a critical component of the time management skill set. Where do you need to focus your time? And guess what? You look at your to-do list today, a third of it you're probably never going to do. So get it off your list. It's just causing you stress. Task management. Some tasks take an hour, some take days, weeks, months. What does that look like? A lot of times we have to figure that out, but we need to understand the end goal. Set goals for ourselves, set goals for our teams, understand where we're trying to get. And if we do that, we can build a schedule of milestones to help us get there. We do that on our projects all the time, but we often don't do that with ourselves and how we manage our time. And a component of that is the planning. The schedule is when we're going to get there. The plan is how we are going to get there. And they're both critically important to time management. How about delegating? You know what I see seller doers doing all the time? Holding the work closely. Oh, I've got too much to do. I can't have any time dedicated to developing new work. Guess what? What you're holding on to, there's a lot of it you could be delegating. And in fact, you need to bring that next generation on. You need to be training your replacement so you can advance in an organization. Delegation is a great way to do that. Integrating technology, it could be Chat GPT, but guess what? It could be better use of your Outlook. It could be using a tool like Monday.com to manage your time, to manage your team time. There's so much opportunity out there to integrate technology into time management. How about decision making? You ever hear the quote, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice? Our lack of decision making is crippling us in our time management, but is also negatively impacting those around us that need that domino to fall, our decision, so they can move forward with what they're doing. And here's a great thing for time management. minimize the disruptions. Your smartwatch that's buzzing several times an hour. I've got one of these Amazon devices right over here that has a screen that flashes up constant messages to me. Sometimes I have to hide it so it doesn't disrupt me. The notifications you get from Teams or Outlook or whatever else, these are all disruptions. Sometimes we have to turn that all off so we can focus on getting stuff done. Next up, networking. Now, networking is unique in that we teach this both as a tool that seller doers can utilize to generate new opportunities, but it is also a skill, and it is a skill that can be learned. A lot of us aren't comfortable with it initially. I've heard some master networkers say that no human being is comfortable with networking because it's kind of, the fight or flight, take care of yourself. Networking kind of goes against that. That's put ourselves in front of a bunch of strangers, right? That where we come from in evolution, that's not where we used to live. The reason we think that's such an important soft skill is research from the Society for Marketing Professional Service. I was able to lead this research back. We published it in November 2019. What happened in January 2020? Yeah, COVID became part of a vocabulary. What we were trying to do was look at what was most important in business development and marketing with AEC firms at that point in time. And by the end of 2022, what did we think would be most important in business development and marketing? You can see networking was number one. The projection for the end of last year was that it was going to still be number two, displaced by client experience. Anecdotally, I would tell you a lot of companies that had aggressive client experience plans, strategies to become more formalized about that. They didn't reach that. Networking is still at the top of their list as the most important approaches. And when we talk networking, there's a whole sub skill set that goes with it. And I promised you before that a lot of these skills that are relevant here are relevant there. And so it should be no surprise that to be good at networking, you need to be an active listener. You need to be a good verbal communicator. You have to have an element of self-confidence. We've talked with those people, and networking doesn't mean you're at a formal networking event. Networking occurs before a project meeting. You need to come across with confidence, because if you're not comfortable and you come across as not being confident, what's the message that the other side is seeing? Maybe that you aren't as competent as you could or should be on the project, and we don't want to imply that in anything that we do. We have to be respectful to everyone around us, not interrupt them. We need to be friendly. If you're not friendly, you're not going to succeed in networking. We need to leverage our emotional intelligence. Again, this is our ability to understand and control our own emotions, as well as interpret and understand the emotions of others. We need a positive attitude. Nobody wants to network with somebody that's negative at all. You avoid them, right? There's enough negativity in the world. We don't need that in our networking. We need to be authentic, be who we are, and not somebody that we're not. You know the type you've talked to at a trade show, a conference, some sort of event, and they like to drop a lot of names, companies, individuals. You don't know who 75% of the people they're talking about or the companies they're talking about anyway. I always say they're being inauthentic when they're doing that, and it demonstrates that they have a lack of confidence in their other abilities that they have to keep name dropping. We need to be sincere. Sincerity is an underappreciated soft skill. It's part of the networking toolbox, but guess what? It's also part of the skill set that every seller doer needs. Networking, at the end of the day, is about helping others. And if you understand that as one of the key tenets of networking, it changes your entire perspective. Go into networking conversations and relationships with a belief that you can help them in some way, shape, or form. We need to come across as trustworthy. When you have networking conversations, sometimes you're told things in confidence. You can't break that confidence whatsoever. And you always have to be approachable. And how do you come across as approachable? Well, certainly being a good listener, demonstrating positivity. Your body language needs to be open. You need to be making eye contact. These make you more approachable. So our next poll we want to hit here is really about, at your company, what do you think is the most effective way to make sure we are coaching and training our seller doers and soft skills? So Kaylee, consider this the handoff.
Alrighty, so the poll is open and getting distributed right now. So check all that apply, by the way. So you don't have to just check one, you can check all of them that apply to you. So we have 5 different options here, and as with the last polling question, I'll keep it open until about 85% of our crowd has participated, or if a minute elapses, whichever comes first, and I'll leave it open for a few more moments here.
We all know we need to provide training. There's a statistic out there that 94% of your employees will stay with your company longer if you invest in their professional development. And certainly soft skills are high in demand. So I think it's a good way to make your company a little more sticky to keep people around.
All right, so the minute is closing in here. So get your last minute votes in, and then I will close and share. All righty, closing the poll now and sharing with the crowd. So it looks like 58% say it's internal training led by staff, 62% say it's internal training led by outside consultants, and that should say, either in person or virtual. 62% say external training led by an instructor in person. 27% say external training led by an instructor virtually, and 22% say online self-paced programs developed by external resources. So Scott, good thing we're on the line with you, because I think that you do something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love seeing these results. Appreciate it, because I think there's a great opportunity for you to start offering the training internally using the low-hanging fruit. And those are the people that already have great soft skills. They might be seller-doers, firm leaders. Leverage their knowledge base and spread that knowledge internally. I think that's really important. But you also saw in the results that a lot of times you need that outside voice, that outside knowledge. And that actually is a really good segue to this next soft skill, number 7 for us, advising. To me, this is critically important. It's really interesting that a lot of the clients that we work with, either on the seller-doer strategy or the seller-doer training side, no surprise, hate the phrase or term seller-doer, right? Sell, 4-letter word. We all hate it. And so they're looking at ways to brand it differently internally. Sometimes it's a relationship manager or a client manager, like we might see in banking. But there's quite a few clients we're working with right now that are really utilizing the trusted advisor. Because if you know anything about the trusted advisor, there's a whole series of books around that. A trusted advisor is always looking at how they can help a client solve challenges. Guess what? That often means more work for the trusted advisor and their firm, but it's helping the clients solve the issues and challenges. And so to be effective as a trusted advisor, a seller-doer needs to truly have that desire to help others. That's sort of a baseline for any advisor. An advisor, by definition, helps others. Need to have a deep knowledge base. So there was a period in my career where I was doing business development for a company that did a lot of work in the food processing sector. And I'm not an engineer, I'm not a process engineer, I'm not a mechanical engineer. So I can't have that conversation about the viscosity of chocolate liqueur in stainless steel process piping. That is not in my knowledge base, but talking to potential clients, they anticipated that should be in my knowledge base. And that's where seller-doers are so valuable, because they have that knowledge that's directly relevant to the client. That deep knowledge base is so critical. A willingness to share. I am a seller-doer. I love sharing. It's the way I do business development, these webinars, speaking at conferences, writing blogs, writing a couple books. I just love sharing, and that's really a hallmark of being an advisor. There's that positive attitude again. An advisor with a negative attitude is probably not a really good advisor, right? A robust network, I think, is really critical to understand that a lot of times the advisor themselves or their company can't solve the issue that the client or the potential client is having. But if you have a robust network, you may know somebody that could help them, that you could do that introduction. Questioning skills coming up again. Peeling back the layers of that onion. And lean thinking, if you're familiar with that, a lot of lean is utilized in factories. There's the concept of the 5 whys. You ask why something is done the way it is. That first answer is not accurate. You peel back a layer with another why, and then another why, and then another why. And it takes 5 whys to get to the underlying or root cause or issue. Active listening, no surprise there. Advisors need to be exceptional active listeners. We need to be objective because a seller doer oftentimes sees a problem and wants to solve the problem before knowing all the facts. And when you do that, you end up 20 miles away from where you really need to be. And if you would stand back, listen, be more objective, you could avoid that embarrassment of being really far off. Big picture focus, I think, is absolutely critical. A lot of these seller doers we work with are engineers. Engineers have a zip code in the weeds. That's what you do. You solve problems. You get down to the nitty gritty. To be an advisor, you need to stand back and look at that big picture, like the example of the cliff coming in student enrollment and how that's going to impact colleges. And that authenticity comes up again and again. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Soft skill 8 here, curiosity. Love this one, not just because of that funky owl in the photo. Curiosity is really a hallmark of a successful seller doer. You have to be willing to ask questions, right? If you're curious, you're going to ask questions. You're going to want to learn more. It's really critical in being curious that you also align that with your interest. For me, my strengths, my interest in helping companies become more successful from a strategic approach and developing their staff is my interest. And so that aligns closely with what I do and the way I'm a seller doer with my clients. A seller doer needs to challenge the traditional ways of thinking, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. You've heard is the definition of insanity. But really, we need to challenge the status quo. A lot of times, the biggest competitor that we face is the status quo. And so by being curious, we can surface some maybe underlying information that others don't know, and then we can leverage that to the benefit of the client or the potential client. View others as resources. Every relationship that I have with clients, I learn as much from them as they do from me. And I think that collaborative effort is driven largely by curiosity. I want to know more as a seller doer. But I also, like every other seller doer, needs to understand we don't know everything and we don't know that we don't know. And if we try to pretend we do, we lose that authenticity that I keep talking about. Sometimes we need to bring in other people, other resources, and sometimes we need to do our own research. Far too many seller doers jump into conversations with potential clients without having done their homework. You could take 2, 3, 4 hours of research before you ever had that initial conversation, understanding who you're talking with, checking out their LinkedIn, checking out their company website, learning more about them, firms they've worked with, projects they've undertaken. That research is absolutely critical to driving a positive seller-doer relationship. We have to learn something new. We have to be willing to learn something new. And I always say at the end of the day, if I didn't learn something new today, it was probably a wasted day. And then I steal this from Kevin Hebblethwaite. A lot of you know Kevin, one of the leaders of business development within Stanball. He's always talking about connecting the dots. And I think when you approach business development with curiosity, you are more likely to connect dots that could lead to new relationships, that could lead to expanded relationships, that could lead to new projects. Always be thinking to connect those dots. Number 9, anticipatory thinking. If you've been on prior Stanball Nest webinars, you know we love our anticipatory thinking. And this is looking to the future. Why do we care about this? Well, that's where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. Tomorrow is the future. We get to tomorrow, it's the present, but Saturday will be the future, right? So we are always evolving into the future. You've probably heard us talk in the past about the anticipatory organization. It is a book with a framework for gaining the future mindset. There are all sorts of different techniques and tools in there. We often do postmortems at the end of projects, but what about a pre-mortem before the project? The both end principle. We seem to live in an either or world, but oftentimes it's both end. Go opposite. Go opposite is you do something different than what everybody else is doing. You go back a couple decades ago, every restaurant had a cup of coffee for 55 cents, and that company in Seattle said, hey, what if we charge $5 for a cup of coffee? They went opposite and became a global icon. I love this one. If it works, it's obsolete. Think about the advancement of technology, really important there. And if you don't have the anticipatory organization book, we want to send you a free copy when you do the survey at the completion of our session together today. Just drop a note in there. Would love to get a copy of the anticipatory organization, and we'll make arrangements to send you a copy. It's really worthwhile. It absolutely is. I do a lot of strategic planning with a couple colleagues here at Stanball Nest. We've embedded this in our strategic planning process because it's that critical. Skill number 10 is negotiation. And guess what? I cheated. I kind of swung persuasion in underneath it. Seller-doers need to negotiate. And yes, fee negotiation happens, but there's a lot of other negotiation that happens. Negotiation around scope, negotiation around team, negotiation around schedule. These are all critical components of what a seller-doer needs to do when dealing with a potential client or an existing client. And how do we do that? Well, guess what? Emotional intelligence is rearing its head again. There's a reason at Stanball Nest, emotional intelligence is one of the single highest requested topics that we deliver in training. Companies are trying to be more intentional with understanding EI, emotional intelligence, or EQ, emotional quotient. We need to have a good knowledge base, that foundational knowledge that we can lean on when it comes to negotiation. We need to understand our value. Too often in negotiation, particularly on the fee side, how do we get it? How do we get our fee lower? How do we get our fee lower? Guess what? When we do that, we start to devalue what we are actually able to provide and offer the client. So we need to understand the value that we're bringing into the conversation. Critical thinking probably goes across every single thing. Absolutely important here as a negotiator. Self-confidence, you've heard never let them see you sweat. That used to be a tagline for a deodorant, I believe. But the reality is, if you're not confident or you don't come across as being confident during negotiation, the end result might not be favorable to you and your firm. Agility and flexibility, I'm going to talk about shortly because that is such a critical soft skill in today's environment. Authenticity, once again, don't try to be somebody you're not. And it's not just about you, the person, it's about you, the company. Be incredibly authentic. Just a real quick story here. Client that I've been working with pursued an owner that they really had no business pursuing. They didn't have the portfolio, the experience base, but there were some other factors that made it worthwhile to do a little bit of a push, and they landed a project. And then another opportunity came with the client, and they're like, yeah, we're probably not qualified. In fact, as their advisor, I'm like, you just don't have the portfolio for this. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But a decision was made to pursue. They pursued it. They were authentic throughout, saying, we do not have the company experience, but look at our people that do have the experience. We made authentic throughout, very transparent, landed another much larger project with that client. And then, hey, our old friends, active listening and verbal communication. But let's also think about persuasion. Why and how do we need to be persuasive? It's far beyond what a seller-doer needs to do. It's what a project manager needs to do. It's what a lead engineer or a construction manager needs to do. We need to, on the selling side of the equation, maybe persuade a prospect that our firm is qualified, or maybe that our firm is different. We're not going to use the term better, but we want to establish differentiation that, yeah, we are better than the competition. We might need to persuade a prospect that their expectations are unrealistic. A couple years before I joined Stanball Nest, when I was on the design and construction side with the company, we pursued a project that the owner had a $20 million budget and a $15 million expectation. We persuaded them at the very beginning of the project that to do what they wanted to do was going to cost $50 million. It was a risk for us. We got selected because we were authentic, we were transparent. In the end, it was a $50 million project. They found the $50 million to make it happen. But we had to be persuasive on the front end that they couldn't do what they wanted to do with the money that they had. We might need to persuade a prospect that our value as an advisor or a consultant to them far exceeds the fee that they're going to pay for us. But think about on the client side. Maybe we're hired now and we're on the doer side of the equation. Persuade that your idea is the best option, that this is the best material, that you want to spec for it. We're doing that daily in our client relationships. Or, hey, how about this? The change order is warranted. That's persuasion we often have to face, right? How about that our schedule is realistic, it's feasible, or Conversely, their schedule is unrealistic. Maybe we need to persuade a client to be a reference for us or give us a referral or write a testimonial letter. Maybe we need to persuade our boss for a raise, or this is very common right now, we need to persuade a potential employee to come work for us because recruitment and retention is a major issue right now with design and construction firms. So persuasion is a daily part of our life, really important soft skill. I talked briefly about flexibility and agility. They're a little bit different, and their definitions are all over the board. We like to look at flexibility as a little more about being more of amoeba, changing shape to meet what's happening. Oftentimes, it's predictable change. We have a big snowstorm that's going to impact the project schedule, might shut down the project for a week. We have 100-year rains that causes flooding, that's impacting the project. Tends to be more task or operational focus, whereas we look at agility more as, think a fox is agile. So a fox is quick. A fox moves around easily, seamlessly in the background. And so agility is typically looked at as an innovative solution or response to an unpredictable change, and tends to be more strategic focused. And a lot of what we think of as agility in the business world today comes out of the software community and the Agile Manifesto. I've made it a little generic here, but I think these 4 tenets of the Agile Manifesto make a lot of sense for a seller-doer. Value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Processes and tools are critically important. It makes us effective, it controls quality, it makes our operation scalable, but at the end of the day, we are people working with people, so value those interactions at a higher level. Value customer solutions over comprehensive documentation. A colleague of mine used to tell a story about where he worked in the past, that whenever they were doing a proposal, the CEO would say, make a book, put a book together, right? Every single piece of boilerplate, every project narrative, make a thick book. And this person would say, but the solution only warrants 2 pages. The client only cares about the solution, not all the documentation that goes with it. So that's focus on the client. That's honestly part of client experience. Value collaboration with your clients over contract negotiation. Contract negotiation is yin and yang, sometimes opposing forces. It's about collaboration and a collaborative relationship that builds trust and leads you to become a trusted advisor. And finally, and this is really where the agility comes in here, value responding to change over having a plan. A lot of the concept within agile thinking is that you do iterations and you fail fast. This works, this doesn't work, let's go back to the drawing board, try again, and you iterate to get that project or that product that truly meets customer needs, wants, and demands by failing fast and trying the different iterations. And finally, our last soft skill here is writing. I talked ChatGPT. Do we need to be good writers in the future? Yeah, guess what? Grammarly found last year $400 billion was lost in productivity because of poor writing. When you have the lack of an Oxford comma in a legal document costing a company millions of dollars, writing still matters. And you think about what a seller-doer does in the context of the day, writing is constant. It is the emails, it's the minutes, it's the memos, it's the letters, it's the studies and reports. There are so many different elements, not even to mention the proposals that we might be working on. If we're connected on LinkedIn, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have seen this post last week. It had a lot of eyeballs. We published a list of words you should avoid in your project communications and in your marketing communications because they can create legal issues. ChatGPT is not thinking about this at all. We need humans to understand the implications of what we're writing. So writing is a critical skill for a seller-doer. And by the way, connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to download it, or put a note in the survey afterwards and we can send you a copy. It's just 21 pages. You can see our marketing team did an amazing job laying it out. Nice, simple document of words to avoid in your marketing and project communications. And finally, that overarching skill that permeates all these other soft skills or power skills that seller-doers must have. We have to be technologically savvy. Absolutely critical. That's why it's skill 12.5 here. And let's just look at what the data tells us. So we know from numerous surveys that in business to business, that's the world that we live in here, that our buyers, our clients or potential clients, are 2/3 of the way through the decision-making process before we ever have a conversation with them. That's because they're checking us out on LinkedIn as individuals, as companies. They're checking out company websites. They're attending our webinars. They're hearing us speak at their client organizations. They're reading our blogs, watching our videos, whatever the case may be. We need to be out there, publicly visible, utilizing oftentimes technology to get in front of them. We also know that a recent study came out from Gartner. They do a lot of research into business to business. They believe that by the end of 2025, 80% of buying is going to happen digitally. 80%. When you're, a dinosaur like me and you're used to sitting across the table from someone, that's highly disruptive. And then research from McKinsey that was recently published found that roughly 3/4 of business to business buyers, our clients, and sellers, AEC firms, prefer either the digital self-serve, get online, order something, email something about, I want to move forward with this, or remote human engagement. That's our Teams meetings, that's our Zoom meetings over face-to-face engagement. So virtual presenting, virtual business development, absolutely critical skills. You can see here, these are all potential tools that seller doers can and do utilize in our industry. No, not everybody does every one. Some focus on one or two, but the reality is that the digital element of business development is huge, and a lot of this generates inbound leads. So as a seller doer with limited time, that's you, that's me. Would you rather be reaching out to 10 prospects, writing cold emails, or responding to a hot lead that came in because you gave a webinar or somebody read your blog? That's much more effective, higher value of your time. So we need to embrace these digital technologies and continually upskill ourselves. So with that, Kaylee, we have one final poll here, and that is about soft skills versus hard skills.
Alrighty, so we put soft skills and hard skills in a duel here, so we'll see who comes out on top. You have 4 different options, whether you think soft skills are more important than hard skills are more important than soft skills, or they are equally important, or not sure. So go ahead and give that a vote, and once we reach our participation levels here, we will close down the poll and share the results. And we're about, go ahead.
I'm really interested in this, Kaylee. I mean, there's a lot of research out there, just general industry, not specific to AEC, that says hiring professionals ranks soft skills or power skills as more important than hard skills. But we need hard skills to get licenses in this industry and deliver our product. So I'm very intrigued.
Right. Alrighty, so we are at 86%, so I will close it and share the results for all of our curious folks out there. So 72% say that they are equally important, 2% say that hard skills are more important than soft skills, and 25% say soft skills are more important than those hard skills. So Scott, what are your thoughts?
So that's almost 100% of you that are saying soft skills are at least as important as hard skills, if not more important. So let this be a call to action for you at your companies to make sure you're getting every generation of staff member, every role in your company, working to upskill their soft skills in whatever format makes the most sense for you. Critically important. Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. And guess what? That's probably a future social media or blog post that's coming your way. So with that, that is our program. I know we're up against time here. Do we have a question or two we can address?
So it doesn't look like we have any questions, but I did want to address that if you are asking for the anticipatory organization, just let us know in our survey if you would like that book, and also a good address to send that to, and we will get that coordinated and sent out to you. So still no questions coming in. So Scott, want to shut it down?
Yeah, so one final thing here I wanted to share. Stamble Nest, we actually just launched a new soft skills training package. Like all the training we do with our clients, it's customizable, but we've had a lot of clients request a specific power skills type program for project managers and seller doers. Happy to chat with you if you're interested in learning more. You have any questions about today, or you want some of the reference sources or other areas where you can research to learn more about soft skills and maybe do some internal training yourself? Connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out via email. I would love to talk to you. And with that, thank you all so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.